My parents live next door to a small red house. Our backyard faces the side of their house, which has a deck and 2 large windows. At front, there were always at least 3 cars parked outside. Oddly enough, in the 10 years I lived there, I never saw anyone enter or leave. Once, when I was 12, I saw shadows thrown against the far wall that were visible through one of the windows. When my sister moved out, I took her bedroom, a large open converted space in the basement, which had a door and an outdoor stairwell which led to the backyard. The door had a small window on it, which my sister had covered up with a Pulp Fiction poster. I redecorated and replaced the poster with some of those sheer half-curtain things. The way the room was set up, if I was lying in bed or sitting on the couch, I was always facing the door. When I first moved down there, I noticed that sometimes at night, I would hear the sound of leaves crunching in the stairwell. I chalked it up to my cat, who just loved to roam around the neighborhood. I had no reason to suspect otherwise, until about a few weeks later. One night when my parents were away on business, my boyfriend and I were sitting on the couch smoking. Suddenly he got very stiff and was just staring out at the window. I asked him what was wrong. I think I just saw a camera flash. I kind of just laughed it off and chalked it up to him being extremely high. Who would want a picture of 2 people getting stoned at night? Still, the seeds of paranoia had been sown, and it wasn't easy to get settled down for sleep that night. I kept looking at the gap between the curtains. There was no light at the bottom of the stairs, so if someone really was down there, I'd be none the wiser. At around 3 in the morning, though, I heard the distinct sound of leaves under heavy boots. Definitely not a cat. I don't know what made me decide that the best course of action for me, standing of all 5'3", was to confront the potential stalker myself. I didn't even take the time to put my shoes on. I just threw the door wide open. There was no one in the stairwell, so I ran up the stairs and into the backyard. Standing there was a man in his mid-40s, maybe 6 feet tall and wearing one of those mechanic jumpsuits. He was holding a clunky, outdated digital camera. We stood there for a moment, just staring at each other. He seemed confused to see me. After what felt like an eternity, I finally remembered how to speak. "What the fuck are you doing?" My voice seemed to startle him greatly, and he immediately turned and ran through my backyard, towards the red house and off into the dark. After that, I didn't see any strange flashes of light, or hear any crunchy leaf noises either. It really freaks me out to think how many nights he could have just been standing there in the dark, watching me and taking pictures. For everyone who was asking, neither of my siblings had any encounters with the guy I saw either. My sister had put the poster over the window to block out the light, and because the idea of the window facing her bed made her anxious, not because she had some stalker she forgot to mention to me. I grew up in Ohio in the 70s, and my childhood friend Joe and I were outside all the time we could manage it. Joe lived on a farm that bordered a pretty big forest. My parents would drop me off in the morning, and we'd stay in the woods all weekend. We'd basically only come out for school. We loved to pretend we were frontiersmen. We'd build shelters, traps, practice making fire with sticks, the whole 9 yards. When we got to be in high school, we had this notion to pull a Stand By Me. This was based on the movie of the same name that had just come out. The idea was that we'd walk the railroad tracks out in the country, but instead of looking for a dead body, we'd find cool bridges to fish from and camp a little ways off the tracks. Of course, we knew this was dangerous, and we'd likely be trespassing, but we were both kids. We had a lot of fun. We did find beautiful rivers, discovered bridges no one went to. We fished, we hid from trains. At night, we camped in woods just to hear the tracks and made small hidden fires. Nothing bad ever happened. It was idyllic. In fact, it was so fun we did it multiple times. Never had a problem. After high school, Joe and I went our own ways. We both left home, but always stayed in touch, and always tried to coordinate visits so we'd see each other occasionally. Well, one summer in the mid-90s, it worked out that we were both in town for about a week. We'd do stuff with family in the day, and at night we'd either catch drinks at a bar or sit outside Joe's house around a fire and talk about the old days. One night, Joe and I got to talking about our Stand By Me trips. Well, nostalgia and beer are a hell of a mix. Soon, we decided to take a day, walk the rails, camp one night, and walk home. The day came, and we started out early in the morning. We had my wife drop us off in our old spot where we used to start, right outside our hometown. She thought this was absolutely crazy, and made sure to mention it. As she pulled away, Joe suggested that instead of walking the usual route, we'd take the opposite direction, just to be adventurous. We knew the land well, we had a map, so I gave a what the hell, and off we set. The day went fine. It was fun and a little bit sad, but in a good way. We found a bridge and sat on the edge, smoked a joint and moved on. We had no fishing gear, but we brought some canned food and other stuff. Before the night started to set in, we picked a spot to camp. It was a thick forested area, trees on every side of the train tracks, so you felt like you were in a tunnel. We had brought small hammocks to sleep on, but before we set them up, we decided to do a little scouting of the perimeter. Now this is what we used to do in the old days, too. We'd walk around the area a little bit, to make sure some dude's house wasn't just over a hill and we were actually camping in their yard. We walked maybe 100 or so feet into the woods, and up a small incline. We figured if we didn't see anything on top of this short hill, we'd be just fine. But when we got to the top, we saw an old building down at the bottom, about 100 yards off into the woods. It was just barely visible. We pondered over what to do. We assumed it was a sugar shack or something, because there didn't appear to be a clear road to it. From where we were, there didn't look to be anyone in it either. All was dead quiet. No movement could be seen. No lights. We decided to walk a little bit closer just to make sure. We came down the hill very slowly, and as we neared the building, we saw it wasn't a sugar shack at all. It was an old church. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. It was a squat, sagging building whose wooden planks were almost black from years of moss and rot. A cross still stood on top of the place, also weathered black. None of the windows had glass, and there were no doors either, just open doorways. We got close enough to see inside. There were rows of pews and a built-up section in front for a preacher to stand. We didn't go all the way in. We didn't want to. Beyond all that, there were no signs of anyone else. No footprints, no paths, and no roads. It was a completely abandoned church. We left immediately and went back up the hill to our spot we had picked to camp out. Having a hill between us and the church made us feel better, but we were still a little uneasy. We chalked it up to the natural creepiness seeing a church in the middle of the woods would elicit. Besides, at this point it was dusk, and we just decided to rig up our hammocks and go to sleep. We'd move on early in the morning. Night set in, and as we lay in our hammocks and shot the shit, we began to hear something coming from the direction of the church. Our conversation about it went a little like this. "Hey, do you hear that? What the fuck is that? It sounds like people singing." And it did sound just like singing. We both slid right out of our hammocks and hunkered down, straining our best to hear more. We listened for a minute or two, and the singing continued, but it wasn't getting louder. Finally, we decided to creep back up the hill and see if we could spy where the sound was coming from. We could still move very quietly in the woods from the old days. It was like second nature to us. The moon was barely out, but it provided enough light so that you wouldn't walk right into a tree, but it was still near pitch black. We didn't use our flashlights as we crept slowly up the hill, and we didn't talk either. When we got to the top, we saw a light shining in the distance. It was coming from the church, and the singing was coming from inside. Joe and I put our heads close together and had a hushed conversation that boiled down to, "Can you believe this shit?" The light looked to be candlelight from the way it flickered, and though we tried, we couldn't make out what was being sung. It sounded like church music, but in another language. We sat and watched for a while, trying to see who was in there, but we only saw occasional shadows. We had no intention of getting closer either. We had about a football field length between us, and we aimed to keep it that way. The singing continued for a bit, and then it stopped. After that, a booming male voice began to chant. I was already freaked out, but this voice thoroughly scared the shit out of me. It sounded like some Old Testament preacher you see in movies, but again, he was speaking in a different language because we couldn't understand a single word. Eventually, it got to the point where a single male voice would say something, and then a bunch of voices would answer in song. It lasted for a while, and then they all broke into this long, sustained wail that just kept getting louder. It got so loud and so disturbing that I had to cover up my ears. Suddenly, it stopped. At this point, I was just getting ready to say, "Let's get the fuck out of here," when Joe put a hand on my shoulder and hissed, "They're coming out." We were far enough away that we couldn't make them out really well, but what we could see was a line of figures walking out the open doorway, all holding hands in single file. We could see some of them had flashlights. They began to sing again, and the light from the flashlights began to move towards us and the hill. We booked it back down to our campsite, grabbed our shit and ran the tracks. Once there, we ran down the tracks in the direction we had come from. After a few minutes, we stopped and looked back. We saw the lights coming down the hill. They were moving erratically, like whoever was holding them was shaking them around. We continued to run in spurts and walk as fast as we could. We eventually stopped seeing the lights and came to a nearby road. By our map, we knew a small town was about 15 minutes down it. We walked there, got to a 24-hour gas station, and called my wife to come get us. My wife and other friends all just thought it was some kids messing around in the woods, but I heard those voices, and they sure as hell didn't sound like kids to me. I'm not sure who those people were, but it was definitely the creepiest thing that ever happened to me out in the woods. This is actually my second post here, and the second time I was stalked, so to speak. I'll try to keep this short, but some backstory is involved, so please bear with me. I was working as an assistant manager at a local KFC, where I worked for roughly 2 to 3 years. I have some really good memories from this place, as well as some very funny stories. We became severely understaffed at one point, though, and my general manager at the time left to work for a CC's Pizza, another local chain. Because of this, I was left in charge of the store until they found or decided on a replacement for him. After probably 3 months or so, during this time tensions were high due to our staffing issues, and I was given a raise for holding down the fort / keeping the store open, despite most of the employees walking out on me the one night. They finally sent us help. A guy and several of his employees from a store located about 40 minutes away. Some things to understand about this store. It was located in a very wealthy neighborhood, and subsequently had very wealthy employees. Anyway, the new manager, Mike, comes in, and immediately starts barking orders at everyone. Obviously, no one is listening to him, but when I tell them to do the exact same thing, they get it done post-haste. He asked me why they wouldn't listen to him, but will listen to me. I explained to him that they aren't here for the money, they're here for the experience. I remind him that they're driving Ferraris to work, and that he needs to be their friend and their boss. In other words, earn their respect, and they will respect you. He agrees to let up on them and try it my way instead. He did listen to me, and did start to earn their respect. And then he turns on me and starts demanding stupid and ridiculous things around the store, most of which are related to the late-night cleaning which he knew I didn't do myself, and I didn't have time for with deposits and whatnot. I got admittedly pissed off and told him to go fuck himself. After a few weeks of this and a serious amount of stress over the last few months, I decided to put in my 2 weeks' notice. At this point, I had already started looking for a job elsewhere and had several offers on the table. I took a job about 2 miles up the street at a local Burger King as their general manager. I ended up working a lot of late shifts because we were always understaffed for those particular shifts. This was fine, but it also meant closing the front by myself, mopping the storefront, locking the doors, while the cook closed the back of the house. I didn't really pay much attention at first. Hell, it was barely noticeable. But at the same time every night, the same car would park in the front of the lot facing the store and just sit there for hours on end. I honestly thought it was kids making out or something at first, but eventually that was clearly not the case. I was always the last to leave the store and set the alarm. One night, the second I lock the door behind me and start to head over to my car, the engine turns over at the car in front of the restaurant. It startled me, so I looked over, but all I could see was the headlights. The car didn't make any signs to move. I hurried to my vehicle and started to drive away, and the second I left the parking lot, so did the other car in the lot. My drive wasn't particularly far from home, but I had a gut feeling that it would be a bad idea to head there right away. I start down the very empty 1 a.m. highway and switch into the left lane with this guy still following behind me. After a minute or two at 10 or 15 miles above the speed limit, I decide to switch into the right lane and drastically slow down to see if he will pass me. The guy also switches over and slows down to keep pace. No, I'm not stupid. I know when I'm being followed, and at this point I was very scared. I grabbed my nearly dead phone and called my husband. I frantically spout off what's going on, and he tells me to drive immediately to the police station. I start heading in that direction. I don't know if this guy caught on to that or not, but right before we hit the road the station is on, he blows by me at an insane speed and keeps driving. I turned around and went home after that. Fast forward another week, and I see the same guy sitting out in the parking lot again, in the exact same car. This time I called the cops right away at the urging of my cook and my assistant manager. The cops showed up pretty fast and get the guy to come out of the car. It's Mike, from my old job. He tells them he wasn't doing anything wrong. He'd developed a crush on me from our time together at our old job, and just wanted to stop by and say hi. They didn't arrest him, but they told him to get the fuck out of there, and they put the fear in him so that he did not show up again. A few years ago, I worked at a small local pet store during college. I was one of 2 women who worked there, and we didn't generally work at nights together. This store kind of specializes in saltwater fish, and reptiles in particular, so it wasn't too odd to have newbie reptile or aquarium people, or people looking to just learn some more before actually getting a little companion. About a year into me working there, this one man would come in and start asking questions about the bearded dragons in particular. I humored him the first couple of times he came in, and answered his questions for about an hour and a half to 2 hours each time. But then he just kept coming in, not buying anything, not looking at other animals. He refused to talk to any other coworkers standing right beside me. He was definitely a man with a very creepy vibe. But after about the 3rd time this guy came in and questioned me about bearded dragon mating habits for an hour, we all started getting a bit uncomfortable. He knew my schedule because we were such a small store. I would call my friends and tell them to come hang out at the shop while he was there, because he was just so persistent about talking to me, and only about the bearded dragons, with the occasional "do you have a boyfriend?" or some pickup line. I told him I wasn't interested each time, and told him I had a boyfriend even though I didn't. At first, we were all pretty forgiving, chalking it up to some social awkwardness, but it started to get scary when he'd come in, look for me, not find me, but find my car, with significant damage at the time and decorated. It was very obviously mine, and just hang outside the shop. My boss and manager started telling me to hide out in our back employees-only rat/mouse room when he'd come in. My friends were all weirded out. I was getting quite uncomfortable around him, and my coworkers were actively trying to curb his enthusiasm for coming in. I ended up quitting that job. Around a month later, I'm watching the news with my dad, and oh buddy, were we in for a surprise. This same guy had been escorted off his ex's property in a local town by police, came back to the house the same night, and murdered her. When she didn't show up for work, her coworkers called for a welfare check. Police get there. He answers the door and tells them his name is Zeus, most definitely not his real name. He lets the police in, and they found her body in the bathtub on a tarp. They also found bloody plates, silverware, and pans in her sink. He had cooked and eaten parts of her heart, liver, and brain. He's still waiting for trial in our state, and his interviews/clips of news people questioning him while the police are escorting him to court are just bonkers. He even tried to claim demonic possession at one point. He had previously murdered 2 people and been released from prison before moving to our area. And trust your instincts about the people who you interact with. People are wild. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. I got a big update for you guys today. It seems like the Teespring store is finally online, so if everything's going well, you should probably be able to see all of the new merchandise on the merchandise shelf below the video. I got some mugs, I got some phone cases, and I got some t-shirts for y'all with the designs on them. All of the shirt designs are under one thing, so if you click on the sweatshirts, it should take you to a page where you can order a different variety of different kinds of shirts. So I just wanted to let you guys know about that. Let me know what you guys think, if it looks good, the pricing, everything. So look forward to that. As always, if you guys liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have a story that you'd like me to read, or you have a story that you'd like to send in yourself, please be sure to check the description of the video below, as it contains all of the links to my social media, including my Facebook, Twitter, Gmail, and Twitch accounts. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in, and what type of story it is, if it does have a type. Also, if you decide to send in a story, please be sure to properly format it into separate paragraphs. Thank you guys very much for that. If you guys are curious about the music used at all in this video, it's all listed in the description below, in the order of which it appears in, with links to all of the artists as well. So if you enjoy their work, please be sure to check it out and support them. Speaking of artists, as always, my friend Alan is doing the thumbnails for the videos now, so I have links to all of his art pages in the description as well. So if you like his art and you appreciate it a lot, please be sure to check out his pages and go support him, because he does some really great stuff. I think that's all for today, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.